Today's daf we're going to be learning is Bava Batra daf Kuf Nun Vav. This week's learning is sponsored by my parents, Paul and Robert Cohen, in loving memory of my grandmother, Sonia Washit, Sarah Bat Yitzchak Zichronah Lebracha, in her third year at Sight. My grandmother was always optimistic despite the many challenges she endured, beginning with leaving her parents behind in Vienna to forge a new life in America at age 14 in 1939. She continues to serve as a role model for our entire family. Okay, we're going to get started with today's daf. We finished up with Ameimar. We started with Ameimar. That was the last thing we did in yesterday's daf, where if we do a very, very quick, brief review, we discussed this idea of a child whose father dies cannot sell the father's property until the child is either 18 or 20. We had a whole question into the 18th year, into the 20th year. We had a bunch of other questions. What if the child is mature enough? We learned if the child's mature enough, even at a younger age, after 12 for a girl, 13 for a boy, they show maturity. Yes, even if they reach age 18 or 20, we saw they also need simanim, unless they hit 20 and they have simanim of being a saris, then, or an ilonit, then we can say, okay, they're already a gadol. If not, we have to wait till 35 and a day. Okay, that was a bit of a summary of the things we saw. And then we also saw about, we had a question that we said they could actually testify once they're 12 or 13. However, Marzutra said only if it relates to metaltal immovables, not if it relates to land. Since they can't sell land, they can't testify about land either. Then we had Ameimar, who all of a sudden said, well, if they give away the inheritance as a gift, that works. To which Rav Ashi jumped on him and said, what are you talking about? Right? Hashta, let's go back to the last two lines of Kuf Nun Hey, Amud Bet. Hashu mazvine de makabel zuze amartelo. If they're getting money for it and you're worried that people are taking advantage and not giving them enough money, right? Dilma mozilu mazabe, maybe they won't understand the value of it. Koshke matana de lomati levelomidi. All the more so if they give it away for free, and they don't get anything out of it, how could you possibly say that this works? Shouldn't you be more concerned that it wouldn't work and that, that people would take advantage or something like that? Or you can't really say people would take advantage of a gift, and maybe we'll see that's why. But they really don't understand the value and they're giving it away because they don't really understand. So Amarle, to which Ameimar responds, according to you, if you think it's all about someone's going to give them less money for it, well then, Zavin Shabecham Shabashita, if they were to sell something worth 5 and someone were to give them 6 for it, more than their value, are you going to say Hachanami Dizvine Zvine? Are you going to say that works? Right? We never heard that. Oh, well, their sale is not a good sale if they're going to undersell, but if they're going to oversell, meaning, or maybe that's not if the buyer is going to overpay, well then, of course it would work. Nobody says that, and that really would fit in with what you're saying. Ella, I'm going to explain why this whole thing doesn't work with a sale, and then from that we'll understand why it would work with a gift. The rabbis understand that children like money, and we talked about this yesterday. Same way you put candy in front of a child, they'll do anything to get that candy. Also, money appeals to them. And if you allow a sale to be a sale, you allow them to sell the land. Someone might wave money in their face. And they might just, for a small amount of money, they might just sell. We talked about this yesterday, right? They might just sell all the property of their father. Aval, like that poem Smart of Shel Silverstein that we discussed yesterday. Aval, right? They'll be so proud. Look, I got all this money for this land, thinking the land isn't worth anything. The money's worth a lot, and it turns out it's not. Aval gabe matana, but what's really a gift? Now we have to try to think about what motivates someone to give a gift. Ilav dahavale hanaamine. If they hadn't gotten benefit from these people, they wouldn't have given them a gift. Who do you give a gift to? Someone who does something for you. So the assumption here is that the person's giving a gift because they got something in return for it. And therefore, here goes like forward thinking. Amru Rabbanan to have matana mile. We want to encourage people to do nice things for these orphans because they're orphans and we want people to take care of them. If we don't allow their gifts to be gifts, okay, now we have to go backwards. If we allow the orphan to give gifts, then people know that they might get a gift out of it. They'll be motivated to do something for these orphans. Or you could say it the other way. If they know that the orphans can't do anything for them, can't sell them anything, can't give them a gift, then they might be less motivated to help the orphans. And in the end, we want people to help orphans. So again, this is the rabbis coming in and saying there's some other thing going on here. We need to motivate people to help orphans. If that's the case, we have to allow their matana to be a matana, because if we don't allow their gifts to be gifts, right, the assumption is because the gift giving will be in response to someone who helped them. Well, if we want to encourage people to help, we have to allow their gifts to be gifts. And that's an interesting approach of trying to say, let's tackle this problem of how we're going to get people to help orphans. Well, this is one way we could do it. And certainly it's not necessarily going to majorly encourage, but it would possibly discourage people from saying, I'm not going to help them because what am I going to get out of it? They can't really help me they can't really do anything back. Okay. New topic, although within this topic, although it's really kind of off topic, Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Shmuel. You'll see why they bring this. First of all, Budkim, we talked about this whole thing of ages, and the last line of what he said is going to be directly related. So again, we have Rav Nachman in the name of Shmuel. This is the line that usually we hold like. So Rav Nachman says in the name of Shmuel, Budkim lekiddushin legerushim v'lechalitza lemiyunim u'lemkor b'nechsei aviv ad sheyeh ben esrim. Okay, so let's just start with the last line from it. That's obviously directly related. A child can sell the property of the father only once he hits age 20. So here you see the Shmuel is posketing like the opinion that it's 20, not 18. But now they say and they have to check for simanim, right? You have to check for simanim when they're 20 so that they can sell the property. You also have to check for simanim for what issues? And here we're back to 12, 13 is the age. But if you're 12, 13, you can't do these actions unless you also have shnei simanim, and therefore we check for kiddushim, for betrothal, for gerushim, for divorce, for chalitza, for undoing a chiyuv of yibum, right? If the man dies without children, then she has to marry the brother, or instead of marrying, she can also do chalitza instead. But they both, okay, in all these cases, they both have to be 12, 13 with simanim. Ula miyunim, and for miyun. Okay, remember what miyun is? So let's go back. Kiddushin, okay, let's even start with Kiddushin for a minute. Because Kiddushin, first of all, a girl can't get betrothed under 12, but that's her father doing it. If she gets betrothed, accepts a betrothal on her own, she has to be over the age of 12 with simanim, and likewise, her husband needs to always be over the age of 13 for a betrothal to be effective by Torah law. Now, some of the commentaries say that we assume that if they got betrothed at 12 and 13, we can assume they were simanim, and the betrothal is a betrothal. So what does it mean you have to check for simanim? Well, if there were a case where she accepted another betrothal after that, and then we have this question, if she accepted one betrothal, the second betrothal is not valid. But if she accepted a betrothal first from someone before she was of age, then that betrothal is invalid and the second one would be valid. So in a case, and we assume, like, let's say what would happen, what would be the relevance if they did Kiddushin at age 12, 13, she would need to get a get. We wouldn't start, let's say they don't want to get married. She would need to get a divorce document. That would be no matter what. We're not going to start checking simanim. We're going to assume l'chumra that they were 12 and 13 and the betrothal was valid. But when it comes to this question of which betrothal was the valid one, because if she was really over 12 and he was really over 13 in the first betrothal, then that betrothal is effective. The second one is not. However, if she didn't have simanim, let's say they were both over 12, 13, but one of them, he or she didn't have simanim, then the betrothal is not valid. And then the second betrothal will be in effect. So that's very important to figure out. And that's the kind of case where we would start checking simanim. Okay. Miyun is a case where, as I said, the father can betroth the daughter under the age of 12, and it's a Torah betrothal. Okay. It's a complete good betrothal. But if the father's not in the picture, either dead or just not around, and the mother or the brother want to betroth the girl, she's too young, she can't do it herself, so they do it on her behalf. Remember, it only goes into effect on a rabbinic level. Therefore, this is a very unique circumstance where she can just do miyun, which is translated as refusal. She can just say, I don't want to be married to this person, but she only has a window in which she can do it. She can only do it until age 12 and simanim, or perhaps we'll see there's a debate about this, exactly at what age. So we check. If she wants to do miyun, we have to make sure if she's over 12 that she doesn't have two simanim, because otherwise she can't do miyun. It's too late. So that's the laws of Shmuel. Now the Gemara is going to analyze these laws and say, why does Shmuel mention all these things? And, of each one, we're going to kind of deal with in a bit of a different way. So Kiddushin, they don't really have a problem with. They don't ask any question, but they do say, well, when do you get divorced? After this Kiddushin. Now, if they already checked for Kiddushin, then obviously they're of age. You don't need to check for Gerushin. So why are he's mentioning Gerushin? Lo nitzracha ela liyibum. Well, you would have to check for Gerushin in a case of Yibum. What kind of case of Yibum would you have to check now? What's Gerushin have to do with the Yibum case? Well, what is Yibum? Yibum is basically marriage. Yibum is the brother marries the widow of his brother by engaging in sexual relations with her. That's the fulfillment of the mitzvah of Yibum. As soon as they engage in sexual relations for the purposes of Yibum, they're married. If he wants to divorce her, he has to give her a divorce. Now, what we're going to show is, even though Kiddushin is not going to be valid unless they were over 12 and 13, the Yibum could be valid, not if she's under 12, but if he's under 12. He could be 9 in a day. D'Tnan, the Mishna says, Ben Tesha Shanim B'Yom Echad Sheba Al Yivimto, if he engaged in relations with her, since a 9-year-old is already, a 9-year-old male is potentially a sexual relation or considered actual sexual relations, then he acquires her. That means that's the language used for a betrothal or marriage in this case. She's acquired by him, meaning they're married. Ve'ein noten get ad she'yigdal. But if he were to do it at this young age, he couldn't divorce her if he wanted to. But let's say they decide they want to get a divorce. He has to wait until he's 13 in Shnei Simanim. And that would be a case where we would check for Simanim, where there would be a reason to check for Simanim for the divorce, even though, the marriage was done before, before they were of age. Whereas in a regular Kiddushin case, they already would have been of age for the Kiddushin, so you wouldn't need to check for the Gerushin. L'chalitza. Why does he mention chalitza? Well, now we're going to say for the next two, the reason why Shmuel mentioned this, or Rav Nachman mentioned the name of Shmuel, this halacha, was to say, I hold this way and I don't hold that way. Okay? Both these cases, there is already a machloket about it. And Shmuel is basically siding on one side of that machloket. Lafuke mit Rabbi Yossi. Da'amar, Rabbi Yossi said, it's basically lafuke means he's trying to say, I don't hold like Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi holds, ish katuv b'parasha. It says in the section of chalitza, ish. Ish means you have to be an ish. Ish is always 13. Aval isha, it didn't say the word isha in that section. So whenever it calls the woman, it calls her yivama, not isha. So they say, Isha, ben gedolah, ben ketana. And Isha can be a minor when it comes to chalitza. That's what he thinks. So Kamash Malan comes Shmuel to say, no, we don't hold like Rabbi Yossi. De makshin an Isha leish, they compare. She is mentioned in the verse as a yivama, so they make this correlation between him and her. Just like he has to be of age, she also has to be of age. And that's why Shmuel pointed this out, to say, I don't hold like Rabbi Yossi. De lo ke Rabbi Yossi. Ula miyunim, also by miyun. Lafu came into Rabbi Yehuda. I told you there's two opinions here. What's Rabbi Yehuda's opinion? Da'amar ad shir beshachol. Rabbi Yehuda gives a longer period of time for the woman to be able to do miyun until the darker hairs kind of become more. Some people say they just get longer. Okay, the point is it's a later stage. I think most of the commentaries say this usually takes about 6 months. It's a point of more growth. Okay, it's not enough just 2 sa'arot. It needs to be more grown. And he thinks that she has a bigger window in which she could do miyun. She can do miyun from the time of the marriage until she reaches that age. Kamash Malan, so comes Shmuel to say, de lo ke Rabbi Yehuda. I don't agree with him. It's simanim, bodkim, if you're 12, 13 for 2 sa'arot, and that's it. Okay, next line, the last line of what he said, and then we're done with our analysis, and then we're going to have a quick run-through from the middle of Kuf Nun Ham about what we paskin like in all the issues that we've been discussing, and then we'll get to the next Mishna. So the last line of Shmuel was Linkor b'nechsei aviv ad sheyeh ben 20. You could have written this line. Lafuke miman damar ben 18. Why did he say that line? Because he wanted you to know that he doesn't hold that it's 18. He holds 20 for the age in which a son or daughter can sell the possessions that they inherited. The hilchata, what's the halacha? So now we're going back to the Bailahu in the middle of Kuf Nun Ham Bet. Tochzman, kilifnei zman, or kalachar zman. If you're into the 17th year, if you're 17 in a day into the 18th year, according to those who say 18, or 19 in a day according to the ones who say 20th year. Into the 20th year, is that like being 20 or is that like being before age 20? Well, the halacha is it's kilif nezman. You actually have to reach your 18th birthday or your 20th birthday in order for it to be effective. So that's the halacha there. It's a little strange that's the halacha there, and I'll remind you of yesterday's sugya. Yesterday, we said there were two opinions. Rava said this opinion, okay, that what we paskin, and Rav Shila said the other opinion. But then the Gemara pointed out that what we said in the name of Rava wasn't really Rava said it. It came from a story where Rava paskin, and actually they misunderstood his psach. And it wasn't because the kid was 17 in a day or 8 or 19 in a day. The reason was because he saw the child was giving away the slaves, and that made no sense. It showed the child had no understanding of anything, and therefore he didn't allow it to go through. And yet we paskin like Rava anyway, which is interesting because it's not even clear Rava said it. I don't have an answer for why that is, but that's what they said. It's actually not really Gidol Bar Menashe. It's the question that Gidol Bar Menashe asked Rava, which was, what about a girl 14 years old who understands? Is herself valid? And Rava said yes. And that means, as we saw yesterday, anyone who shows maturity once they're over the age of 12 for a girl and 13 for a boy, they can sell their father's property. It's a valid sale. Marzutra was the one who said yesterday, the end of the daf, that even though we accept their testimony before their age 20 or whatever the age is or whatever their understanding is, we don't accept their testimony for land. And we paskin that way. And Hilchata Ameimar, now we're getting to the sugyas of today. Their gifts are valid gifts. And Hilchata Rav Nachman Amar Shmuel B'kulhu. And everything that Shmuel said, we paskin like that, meaning all the bodkim, kiddushin, all those four things. And finally, we get what we really were looking for. At least I thought that was the basic. I would have started with this, that 20 is the age. Okay, 20 is the age of, and not 18, of which a standard kid can sell, right? Unless they show maturity before, and that could be from age 12 for a girl, 13 for a boy, but otherwise it's going to be age 20, and 2 simanim, unless they show simanim of a saris or an ilonit, where they already show simanim that they're not going to ever develop signs, and then we'll let them already sell at age 20. Okay, that was a good review. Now moving on to a new topic, but it's not really a new topic, and in fact, it's really strange that the Mishnah only brings this up now. Until now, we've been discussing, we particularly talked about in Kuf Nun Aleph when it finally came up in the Gemara, the words, right? Every time the Shchid Merah, you're on your deathbed, someone says, right, I want to give away my property, we're worried. Okay, we had some sources in the Torah, but really we always quote this, Shemati Taref Da'ato Alav, we're worried, we don't want to get the person more worked up, either speed up their death or just have them die in an unpleasant way where they're all worked up. We want to let them die peacefully or maybe even get better. So whatever they say is good. Basically, that means you don't need a kinyan to affect transaction of gifts. If you want to give out all your property, you can give it out with words only. Well, you're going to be surprised then by the next line, because it turns out Rabbi Elazar, the Tana Rabbi Elazar, disagrees with this whole law. And this is going to sound just out of a Mishna in Kiddushin, the Mishna that we always quote when it comes to kinyanim, acts of acquiring. If you're dividing up your property in words, meaning you're on your deathbed and you're giving out who's getting what, Rabbi Elazar Omer, echad bari ve'echad mesukan, whether you're healthy and you want to give out all your property and say, this is going to be when I die, or you want to do it right now, or or you're on your deathbed. Nechasim sheyesh lahem achrayut niknim bekesef ubeshtar ubechazaka. If it's land, the only way you can pass it on is with the typical ways of passing on land, which is either they pay money or you give a deed that says, I'm giving this to you as a gift, or you give a deed that I'm selling it to you, or chazakah, or they go into the land, you say, I'm selling it to you, and then they go, you could say it just orally, but then they go into the land and they acquire it. Short of that, it's not theirs. So then if you're to die and they haven't done that, well, you can't do a kinyan after death. They can't go in and say, oh, now I'm acquiring the land and doing a chazakah there. Too late. If they're movables, and how do you acquire movables? By pulling. That's the only way to do it. Since you can't do it any other way. Okay, and the Rashbam says here, Rabbi Elazar Sfira le'inyan shchimra, the first Rashbam in the Mishna here, Einam kechtuvim uchimsurim klal. They're not as if they're written and passed on. Okay, it's not. Ela kibari ba'alma. It's like a regular person, and it needs a kinyan. Okay, kish arma not bari. And even if the person dies, the person who you said I wanted to go to won't get it. Doesn't work. Okay, and they even say afilu mitzaveh machmat mita. Even if you said I want to do this because I'm dying, it doesn't help. Doesn't work. Okay, totally against what we said before. Okay, and then they say the last line of the Rashbam, he says, right? At first he says, even if lo shiur midi, even if he didn't leave anything over for himself, right? We still don't view this. It's not enough b'amira. And then he says, it seems to me, in the case of the person dies, it doesn't make a difference, right? They don't get it. Huadin. He thinks that Rabbi Elazar. He thinks also what this would mean is that if you got better, it's done because you did a kinyan and it's gone and you can't get it back either. Okay, that's something that's not clear in the Mishnah, but that's something the Rashbam seems to think. Okay. The Rama with a hey and the Meiri both say that this is only when you're talking about giving it as a gift to other people who are not your heirs. But if you prefer one heir to the other, like ben abanim, bat ben abanot, that whole Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka, that would be a different story. Then you could do it with words alone, and that's based on the Mishna on Daf Kuf Lamed. Okay, but this isn't referring to that because that's Yerusha. Remember, that's what the whole thing of Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka. If you're doing it like that, then it's laws of inheritance, and that you could do with words only. Here we're talking about if you want to give gifts to other people, you want to give away possessions of yours to other people, then it wouldn't work. Okay? And that's Rabbi Elazar's unique opinion. We're going to continue now in the Mishnah with the back and forth. The rabbis are going to say, wait a minute, we can disprove you. So turning now to Amabet, continuing in the Mishnah, Amrulo, Maaseh bi'iman shel b'nei Rochel, which we already learned, by the way. The sons of this man whose name was Rochel, their mother, Hayta chola, she was sick. Okay, the father was dead already, and her stuff was supposed to go to the sons. Ve'amra, and she said, and she didn't do a kinyan, all she did was say, Tnu kivinati libiti. Go give this particular piece of jewelry I have to my daughter. Vihi b'shnei sarman, it was worth 1,200 zuzim, a lot of money. Vameta, she died. Now let's just go. The rabbis are trying to say, what happened here? They did what she said, and the sons had no rights to claim back this jewelry as the heirs. So what do you see? You're wrong, Rabbi Elazar, because her words were as if they were written and passed on. They fulfilled them. Amar lahen, to which Rabbi Elazar answers, B'nei Rochel tikberem iman. The B'nei Rochel should have been buried by their mother, meaning they deserved to die. They were bad people. And because they were bad people, the rabbis penalized them here and let the daughter get the gift, not because it was halachically hers. The rabbis penalized them. Okay, the rabbis have the right to decide, to determine money. We've learned this many times. Hefker Beitin. Hefker, the Beitin has the right to decide your money is going to somebody else. And in this case, they saw a reason to penalize it. Now, you're going to be surprised later when you say what they did that was so bad. You would think like they did something terrible. They were robbing people. They were, I don't know what. It's a little surprising when the Gemara gets to what exactly did they do wrong, because the Gemara is not going to leave that open. We want to know, who are these people? Let's dig up the dirt. Let's hear what they did so bad that they deserve this curse of his. You can determine what you think about it. So anyway, he says they were deserving to lose the money for a different reason. That has nothing to do with our halacha. So in our Mishnah, we have machloket, Rabbi Elazar and the rabbis. We don't actually see the rabbi's opinion, but we see the rabbis are arguing with him when we know the rabbi's opinion because we've been learning it all along. And we have the rabbis trying to prove it from a case, and Rabbi Elazar explaining how the case works with his opinion. Now we're going to bring a braita where it's the reverse. Okay, we're going to have the opinions stay the same, but we're going to have Rabbi Elazar, bring a proof for his opinion, and then the rabbis are going to say, no, that story doesn't prove your opinion. So it's going to be the same idea where we're bringing a case that happened to try to prove, but who's proving what from the story is the opposite here. So Amar Lahen Rabbi Elazar, I'm just going to tell you from here, okay, there's Rabbi Eliezer in the next Mishnah. from here till the end of the Gemara, it's going to keep saying Rabbi Eliezer, but it should be written as Rabbi Elazar. Okay, there's debate about how to exactly read all this, but most commentaries switch it to Rabbi Elazar. We're going to read it like that. Amar lahem Rabbi Elazar lechachamim, right? Often Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Elazar get switched, probably because they just wrote Aleph Lamed and whoever was the scribe got confused, or perhaps here because there's two Mishnayot, and Rabbi Eliezer also, we're going to see, has an opinion about this machloket, perhaps because of that it got a little confusing. Amar lahem Rabbi Elazar lechachamim, Maaseh b'maroni echad, shaya b'Yerushalayim. There was someone from Maron. Okay, some people say it's Miron. Some people, there's a different version when it appears, the sugya appears elsewhere, it appears Madoni, from Madon. If you want to know more about that, Shuli's article this week is all about that, about Miron and Madon, and you can go more in depth. Maaseh b'Madoni echad. By the way, that reminds me, also later today, okay, there's two more shiurim coming up. One is on the last part, which will be a gefet. I'll talk about that when we get there. And Alana Stein-Hain's shiur of this week is going to go up today, which is all about what we were just learning about, the whole thing, which was hard to understand. It's always great when she decides to go in depth into really interesting topics that come up that we don't have enough time to delve into, which is the whole thing about the kiyum shtar, hamodeh b'shtar shekatvo, sarich l'kaimo, ain't sarich l'kaimo, and a much more in-depth analysis about what exactly is going on in that case and what are the reasons behind saying why you would have to either yes, have to ratify the document, or no, have to ratify the document. Again, being the case where the person who wrote it admits it was a document, but says, but the document was problematic for whatever reason. Why, can we accept that part that the person said, oh, I wrote it, and then the document stands on its own, or do we say no? Once the person who said it is the same person who undid it, and therefore we're going to view it as undone. So whole in-depth shiur into that topic. So you can look later on the site. It should be up later today. Okay, back to our topic. So we have a case of a Maroni or Madoni Echad who is in Yerushalayim. Hayab Yerushalayim. Vahayu lo metaltalin harbe. He had a lot of possessions. So which case liknam b'matanan. Now, right now we're assuming. Why do you want to give away all his possessions? Because he thought he was dying. Amru lo ein lahem takana ad sheyiknel gav karka. He said to him, it doesn't work unless you do it a kinyan agav. In other words, obviously it doesn't work unless you pass them on. But all the metaltalin weren't in front of him while he was on his deathbed to pass them to everybody. So the much easier way to get rid of all this metaltalin is to do a kinyan agav. If you remember, what do? You have a piece of land, you give away a bit of that land, and then when the person does an act of acquiring on that land, they can then acquire all of the metaltalin that you were discussing. So the rabbi said, that's what you have to do. Halach v'lakach beit sela echad samuch liYerushalayim. After warning, the guy was on his deathbed. I don't know how he did this, but he went and he bought a piece of land next to Jerusalem, a small section there. V'amar tzvono leploni v'imo me'atzon u'me'achaviyot. Okay, the northern part of this is going to Ploni, and with it, he's going to get 100 of my sheep and 100 barrels. Udromo leploni, and the southern part of it is going to go to somebody else. V'imo me'atzon u'me'achaviyot, and with that, he'll acquire the 100 son, the 100 chaviyot. And he did it with some sort of kinyan that worked with the land. V'meit, and then died. That's why we can assume he probably was a shchimera before. And kimu chachamim mitvarav. So comes Rabbi Elazar and says, and then the rabbi said this was valid. What do you see? The rabbis required this kind of thing. It wasn't enough that he would just say, I want to give 100 sown and 100 barrels to this person, and I want to give 100 sheep and 100 barrels to this person. That wouldn't have worked. So Rabbi Elazar says, there you see, divrei shchimera are not kichtuvim muchim dam. To which the rabbi said, Amrulo, Misham Raya, and this is similar to the Bnei Brak story, that one person told the story to raise it as contradiction to the other, and the other one said, you got the details wrong. Right? They don't tell us all the details. In fact, you might have noticed I was filling in details. Obviously, the guy was sick on his deathbed, okay? But Amrulo, Misham Raya, Maroni Bari Haya. He wasn't a Shchid Meira. He was healthy at the time, and then he died. He died later. Maybe he died the next day on some crazy who knows what. But no, he was healthy at the time, and that's why they required a kinyan. But if he was on his deathbed, of course they wouldn't have required a kinyan. And since we don't really know the truth of the details, neither one can prove that this story proves their opinion. So that thus ends our story. And by the way, it makes a little more sense then, as I mentioned before, if he was on his deathbed, how was he going and buying a piece of land somewhere else? Well, he wasn't on his deathbed. He was just planning, and he wanted to give away property of his and give away these metaltalin. So he bought a little piece of property, give away metaltalin, and and then before I guess they acquired it, he died, and then the rabbi said it belongs to you. Of course, it belonged to them, right? He did a kinyan. Okay. Amar lahem b'nei rochel tikbarei mimam. So I just wanted to point out, that's why I said it before, but now I'll summarize it. In this Mishna and in this Braita, we had a story that was trying to prove, but each time it was trying to prove someone else's opinion. First, the rabbis brought a story with the Bnei Rochel to disprove Rabbi Elazar, but Rabbi Elazar had an answer. And in the Braita, Rabbi Elazar brought a story to prove his opinion, and that proof was rejected. Now we want to understand, what did these Bnei Rochel do wrong that they were deserving of this curse? My time akalayelu. Why did he curse them that their mother should bury them? It's a pretty serious curse. Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel mikaimei kotzim bekerem hayu. They were people who left thorns growing in their vineyard. Okay, why is that a problem? This is a problem of what we call kilei kerem. Now, you might say, what are you talking about? What's kilei kerem? It's when you have a vineyard, and in your vineyard, there's wheat growing usually. Okay, wheat, barley, something like that, and they mix together, and that's not allowed. That's kilayim, that's mixed breeds. It's like shatnez. You're mixing two things that shouldn't be mixed. And in this case, it's not that he planted these thorns. Okay, the thorns are in place of the grains here. The thorns mixed in with the vineyard, with the vines, and they didn't remove them. Okay, there's a chiyuv to actually remove your kilayim, and this goes according to the opinion that says, the Rashbam says, afilu makayim lo ken. Okay, even though it says lo tizra kamecha kilayim, there's a drasha that says kilayim. They say kilayim sadcha lo. In the lo tizra kilayim, don't even keep kilayim in your field. And that if you keep kilayim in your field, you actually get lashes. And that's why you curse them, because they did something that was liable for lashes. Okay, so you might say, why does this sound so terrible? First of all, kotzim we're going to have to deal with. Thorns aren't wheat. It's not something you eat. It's not something you generally, it seems weird. How is that part of kilayim? We're going to talk about that. What they don't talk about is, why is that so severe that he should say your mother should bury you just because you didn't take out the kilayim in your field? Anyway, he saw that as a pretty serious offense. Also, you have to remember, he was just trying to answer the question that was raised against him. They raised a difficulty, and he was trying to come up with an answer. So it's possible they weren't so bad, but he does curse them. Sounds pretty severe. So I don't have an answer for that, why he thought this was such a severe thing to do. Anyway, we'll read what the Gemara does with it. But Rabbi Elazar, it should be Elazar, not Eliezer. Rabbi Elazar l'ta'ameh goes according to his own shita there. Ditnan hamakayem kotzim bekerem. Rabbi Elazar omer kidesh. Kidesh is the word they use in the Torah for kilayim. It actually usually is a positive word. This is a negative word. It means you create, you have kilayim in your field. So someone who leaves thorns in the field, Rabbi Eliezer says that's kidesh. Chachamim omrim lo kidesh ela davar shekamohu mekayim. The rabbis say it's only something that you want to leave in your field. Since you don't want to leave kotzim in your field, nobody wants thorns. It's not like grains that you want. So you're only liable for keeping kilayim if it's something that you want to keep in your field. And thorns would not count. So we have this machloket, and that matches their machloket here. That's why the rabbis didn't think the Bnei Rochel were deserving of anything, because they just left kotzim, and kotzim is not a problem. Whereas Rabbi Elazar thought that kotzim were a problem. Now, Bishlama, now we just have to ask about Rabbi Elazar and his opinion. Why would Mekayem Kotzim Bekerem be a problem at all? Bishlama Karkum Chaze. Now, commentators say, why are we bringing up saffron here? What does saffron Karkum have to do with anything? Good question, but I think what they're just trying to make a foil. If someone was growing, let's say, Karkum, saffron, it's worthy of something. So we could call that, right? It's not grain, but it is Karkum. So it is useful, and people use it in their food. But what do people use thorns for? Like, even though he didn't agree with the rabbis, it has to be something that people want to keep. Still, it would have to be something worthy of something to be liable for kilayim. So, Amar Rabbi Chanina, my time de Rabbi Elazar, shekem ba'Aravia mekaymim kotzim b'sadot ligmal lehem. There are some places, like in Arabia, where they use these kinds of thorns. There must have been some kind of thorn that the camels would eat. And since there's some kind of thorn that the camels eat, Rabbi Elazar views this. It's always a matter of how much. As long as somehow you can use this, then we can basically say If somehow this is usable, then we will call this usable in general. So since there are people, because what did the rabbi say? It has to be something you keep growing in your field. If you feed your camels with it, then you'll leave it growing in your field. If it were to be there, you wouldn't weed it out. So since there's thorns that camels eat, therefore this is considered what they did. Either was this type, or since this type, then any type. You have to, figure out exactly what he means, but that would basically, that's why what they did was considered bad, according to Rabbi Elazar. Okay, now we have Amar Rabbi Levi. Rabbi Levi says, Konim kinyan mishchimera afilu b'Shabbat. V'lo lachush l'divrei Rabbi Elazar el Hashem titrof da'ato alav. Rabbi Levi now says, you can do a kinyan from a shchimera. Okay, if a shchimera is on their deathbed and wants to give away their possessions, you can do a kinyan even on Shabbat. Okay, it's so important to do a kinyan that we allow it, which is crazy, right? Even on Shabbat, we allow you to do a kinyan. Now, the Gemara points out, you would think, if you didn't read what I just read in the Gemara, you would think he must hold like Rabbi Elazar, because the rabbis say you don't even need a kinyan, right? The words of a shchimera are as if they were written, right? Why? We don't want the person to go crazy, so we say your words are fine. They're sufficient, even though normally you would need a kinyan. Comes Rabbi Levi and he says something to the other extreme, but very interesting based on the same thing. He says, not only, right, he's basically saying we allow a kinyan to be done if someone's on their deathbed, and it's Shabbat even. We allow them to do a kinyan to make sure that the property goes to the people they want it to go to, even on Shabbat. But lo lachush l'divrei Rabbi Elazar. It's not because he holds like Rabbi Elazar that it's not enough to just say it in words and therefore do a kinyan so that it's effective. Now we're using the same concept that we're worried someone will go crazy for a totally different reason. Before we use it to say your words are enough. Now we're using it to say it's true your words are enough. However, picture the person on the deathbed. They're making a promise. They want the money to go. But they don't really trust that they feel like they want something more solid to make sure that as they're on their deathbed, they want to really ensure that what they say is going to happen. Now, even though it really is effective, because he doesn't hold like Rabbi Elazar, and what they say really is totally effective, but to make them feel better, they might, if they say, I want to do a kinyan, I'm not satisfied until we do a kinyan, and it happens to be Shabbat, we allow it. Crazy, right? It's, again, taking this concept of trying to keep people calm on their deathbed which again, could be understood in two ways, either because we want them to get healthy again, or even just we want them to die in a peaceful way and not be worked up at their time of their death. We allow something that in general we would not allow an active acquisition on Shabbat, but we permit it in this case because, and even though there's no halachic significance to what they're doing, it would be a done deal anyway. We allow this kinyan because for that person, it's important to them, and we allow it to go through on Shabbat. That's a really interesting opinion. Okay, moving now to the next Mishna. Now we get to Rabbi Eliezer, which is really an in-between position between the rabbis and Rabbi Elazar. Rabbi Elazar, right, the rabbis are in the position, the words of a shchimera are as if they're written and given over. Comes Rabbi Elazar and says, no, they're not. You need to do a full-fledged kinyan. Comes Rabbi Eliezer and says, B'Shabbat v'arav kayamim mipnei she'ein yachol lichtov aval lo b'chol. He says, on a regular day, you'd have to write it. Okay, I'm going to take Rabbi Elazar and say, you're right. You do have to write it. But that's only if you're on your deathbed on a regular day. But if you're on your deathbed on Shabbat, okay, and this is as opposed to what Rabbi Levi just said, if you're on your deathbed on Shabbat and you can't do a kinyan because it's Shabbat, then we basically say, okay, then we're going to accept your words alone. So he has this in-between position. Depends if it's Shabbat or Yom Chol. Comes Rabbi Yehoshua and says an opposite approach sort of thing. He says, okay, or opposite logic, B'Shabbat amru, kal v'chomer b'chol. If you're going to say that a divrei shchimera kechtuv m'chum misurim dami on Shabbat, then of course you're going to say it works on chol. Okay, what's the logic? Well, the logic is, so First of all, let's just look in the Rashbam. B'Shabbat amru shedvarav kayamim, that it works. Afagav delay Ameimar. Now, here's the key thing. Even though you can't say amigo, it's amigo, mitoch, okay, what's amigo? Migo diachol liknof v'lichtov, kilo avidnami kane. The concept here is we're going to allow this to go through because if you wanted to, you could have done a kinyan. Therefore, even if you didn't do a kinyan, it's valid. Okay, that would be the logic on Shabbat. Okay, that would be the logic on Chol. That since you can do it and you didn't, we'll allow it to go through. And this is based on, okay, Kavachomer bechol dechol hara'oi lebila ein bila ma'akevet bo. Do you remember this line? We've seen this many, many times. It always comes back to this. It goes back to the korban mincha. The korban mincha has to be mixed according to the Torah. Belula bashemen. Okay, it has to be mixed with oil. It's this solat, pine flour mixed with oil. What if you didn't mix it? Well, if you didn't mix it, it'll be valid if it could have been mixed. Okay, and what is this? If you put the bowl in the temple could hold 40 isronot with an overflow of another, right? A bowl can hold, plus you can have some piling up of up to 60, up to a third more. Now, or up to 50% more, actually. Depends how you view it. Now, what does it mean? It means it can hold up to 60 because up to 60, you could still mix it without everything falling out. And therefore, if you did it in a bowl of 60 and you didn't mix it, it's fine because you could have mixed it. That allows you even if you didn't mix it. But if you put more than 60 in where it couldn't possibly have been mixed, then we don't allow it if it's not mixed. So how does that apply here? Well, b'Shabbat, you can't do a kinyan. Okay, forgetting about Rabbi Levi, who thinks you can, but you can't do a kinyan on Shabbat. So if you can't do a kinyan on Shabbat, but you can on Chol, then you would think the opposite. If we say the divrei shlimera or kirtu mechumasurim dami on Shabbat, where you couldn't have written it, and yet we allow it to be right, even if you didn't write it. So on Chol, you would say all the more so, since on Chol you could potentially write it. So if you didn't write it, we are going to allow it more so because you could have written it. So once we allow it on Shabbat, of course we're going to allow it on Chol. So he takes the opposite approach of Rabbi Eliezer. And if you didn't understand the logic, we're going to see it again right now because they have the same kind of debate in another case. And this is what the topic of Gefet is, which is Kayotsebo, zakhin lekatan ve'ein zakhin legadol, divrei Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Yehoshua omer lekatan amru kavachomer legadol. We've learned this concept many times, and that's why it's great to go more in depth into this. Listen to Shalabat Schwartz on this, which is right, based on Rabbanit Dreyfus' Shiur, which is zakhin la'adam shelo b'fanav. This is we allow someone to acquire something for someone who's not there, right? As long as it's good for them, it's a zichiyah. Like I can accept the gift on your behalf, even if you're not there and you don't even know about it. The question is that only true for a minor or is it true for everyone? So again comes Rabbi Elazar's logic, and he says, it's only to resolve a problem. If you can't do it in a regular way, because you can't give a gift to a katan because a katan's not old enough. So we employ zakhin. Zakhin comes in to resolve a problem. Can't give it to a katan, so you do zakhin. But not for a gadol. A gadol should do it themselves. Okay, same thing. On Chol, you could do a kinyan, right, with the previous case. So do a kinyan. On a Shabbat, where you can't do a kinyan, we'll allow, right, the divrei shlimer. Rabbi Yehoshua omer, the katan amru kavachomer legadol. If in a case where it doesn't, the katan couldn't do it himself, and we allow this method of someone else doing it for them, all the more so in a gadol, when a gadol can do the action themselves, of course we can let this go through and have someone else do it for them, right? You're in a stronger position if it's actually possible. You're in a weaker position when it's impossible. And that's based on the kol haroy lebila bila kevet. What Gefet does in the Shiur is they use this as this machloket and different ways of understanding this debate between them as a way of better understanding how zakhin works. By what principles does zakhin work? So we're going to stop here. The next part is really just starting, so I don't want to start getting into it. But the Gemara asks matnite mane, and the Gemara is going to say our Mishnah follows Rabbi Yehuda's position because the Tanya Rabbi Meir Omer. We're going to start with that tomorrow. Rabbi Meir has a totally different understanding of the machloket Rabbi Elazar and the rabbis. Okay, there was a debate about what Rabbi Elazar and the rabbis debated in the Mishnah. He has a different understanding of the opinions that each one of them takes. So our version matches Rabbi Yehuda's version of the understanding of the machloket, but Rabbi Meir had a different version of what Rabbi Elazar and the rabbis deliberated about. So that will start in tomorrow's daf. So what we did today, and we kind of reviewed it already in the beginning by the Hilchata, was we talked about a few other issues relating to this katan, and then we also got to other cases where you would need simanim, right? So we had the matanato matanav Ameimar, we had the halachot of Shmuel about when you have to check simanim and the fact that it's 20 is the age, and then we had halacha of like this, that, and the other one from the bunch of the sugyot that we started yesterday through today. Then we started with this radical opinion, or radical seemingly, because until now we've been saying otherwise, of Rabbi Elazar, that you need a full-fledged kinyan. We had Rabbi Yehoshua, we had the rabbis and Rabbi Elazar, each trying to prove their position from different cases that happened, and each one explaining how it worked. We went off on a tangent about Bnei Rochel and what they did wrong. We came back to this halach of Rabbi Levi, who basically said that you could do a kinyan even on Shabbat, but not because he was like Rabbi Elazar, but because it's another concern that if that's what the person dying wants, we're going to do a dying person's wishes, even if it's doing a kinyan on Shabbat. And then we got to this other machlokah, Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yehoshua, about whether which way this argument goes. Do we put in solutions to resolve problems only, right? Or if it works where it wouldn't work otherwise, all the more so it would work as a solution in a case where it would work anyway. Okay, and that was the debate about whether the divrei shchiv meira is only valid on Shabbat when you can't do a kinyan, or if it's valid on Shabbat, then of course it's valid even not on Shabbat. And likewise for the zakhin lekatan, just a katan, or is zakhin something used also even for a gadol? We know obviously it is used for a gadol because we see it all the time. So we obviously paskin like Rabbi Yehoshua. And then tomorrow we'll start with the two different versions of what their machloket is. One we saw already in our Mishnah, which is Rabbi Yehuda's position. Tomorrow we'll see Rabbi Meir. With that, we finish for today. Wishing everyone a good day.